Hi, thanks for joining me today in my kitchen. Today I'm going to be making this really delicious Babkallah. What is it? It's like a cross between a chocolate babka and a braided challah bread. Hopefully you're really going to love it. I love it. If this does not entice you, I don't know what will. Stay tuned. We're going to talk all about how to make it. And hopefully you'll be able to make one that is just as good, if not better. Share your results after you make it. I can't wait to see it. Let's go. Okay, let's get started with what equipment we're going to need for today's Babkallah project. First, you're going to want a stand mixer if you have one, and we're going to be using the dough hook attachment. If you don't have this, it's okay, you can still make it. You'll just need a big bowl and a sturdy mixing spoon and, those power muscles that you've been getting at the gym. Next, you're gonna want some cling wrap or some kind of plastic wrap, measuring cups, and the teaspoon measure is the only one we'll need today, I think. A basting brush, a large bowl, a baking sheet. If you have the kind that's got the ridge that comes up all the way around the edge, that's okay too. But just something that is quite large, so you could put a large flat loaf on top of it. And then a piece of parchment paper that will fit your baking sheet. Okay, now we're going to talk about the ingredients we need to make this bread. First thing, 3 cups of flour. Just a note about measuring flour. You want to measure flour when it's fluffy. What do I mean by that? You don't want to pack it in. You want to have some space in that flour. You want it to feel fluffy and light when you measure it. So a lot of times you can use an actual flour sifter to run it through, and that should help you get like the right density. Or if you don't have that, you can always just take a whisk and run it through there, or just kind of, as you're taking it out of the bag, fluff it with the spoon and gently put it into your measuring container and maybe give it a little stir while it's in there, just to make sure it's staying pretty light. Also, I don't like to actually measure out dry ingredients like flour in this kind of measuring cup. I mean, it's great for liquid ingredients, but for dry, it doesn't lay completely level. It just kind of lays however you put it in there. So it's really hard to be able to look at it from the side and determine if you've got an actual 3 cups. So what I normally do is I'll measure it in a cup measure and then move it to something larger. Next, you're going to want a stick of unsalted butter. We are going to melt this, but 1 stick. Half a cup of warm milk. I actually have a cup in here, so I'm going to have to change that. 2 eggs. So I've already broken those, but 2 eggs. 1/3 of a cup of sugar. 1 envelope of active dry yeast, which is about 2 1/4 teaspoons if you have more of a bulk type of packaging for this stuff. If you don't have active dry yeast, if you have one of the instant yeasts, which are either called instant, quick rise, rapid rise, or bread machine yeast, you can use that also. I'll just let you know how you have to change that as we're going through the recipe. 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and because I don't want to dirty another bowl just for this, I'm going to add that directly in with my eggs because I add that at the same time anyway, so that's totally cool. 1 teaspoon of salt. So those are the ingredients we will need to make the dough. Then later, what are we going to need? We're going to need some things to do the delicious chocolate swirl inside. So over 1 cup. This is 6 ounces of chocolate. I'm using chocolate chips. So you can see about how much 6 ounces is. This is a 1 cup measure, so it's kind of a little overlapping that 1 cup. You can definitely measure it. If you can weigh it out, it's the easiest way to make sure you have the right amount. But if you have a 1 cup measure and you just have just like this little bump over the top, you're probably pretty close to there. If you're not using chocolate chips, if you're chopping up chocolate or shaving chocolate, just try to go by weight. It's going to be the best way for you to get the correct amount. Then we're going to do 1 cup of finely chopped walnuts. Can you see that? 1 cup. And when I say finely chop, I mean you still want them to look like walnuts. You still want them to have some texture. You don't want them to be so big that they interfere with making the swirl, right? Because that's kind of the gorgeous part about this bread. But you still want people to know it's walnuts. You don't want them to turn completely into dust. And then we're going to need 1 more egg for egg wash. Also, sorry, for the chocolate filling, we're going to use 1 tablespoon of butter and also 1 tablespoon of milk or half and half. And then for the top, we're going to have 1 more egg to do an egg wash to make it nice and glossy. And then this is 100% optional, but I think it's really nice. Last time I made this bread, I used this coarse ground sparkly sugar, which you find with baking decorating supplies like cake decorating. People use these on their holiday cookies and stuff because it will not melt when you put it in the oven. A lot of sugar will just melt and then you have nothing. So if you have a nice coarse sugar that you have used before and you know it's not going to melt, that's great. Since it's chocolate inside, I was actually thinking of using these chocolate jimmies today. I'm not sure how that's going to show up on the dark bread, but I might give it a try. Maybe I'll go half and half and see what happens. That's it for the ingredients, and as soon as I get myself organized, we're going to start baking. Here's what I've done in the last couple minutes. I turned on the oven for about 1 minute just to warm it up in there. You don't want it to get hot, but you want it to be around 90 degrees or so, which I don't know about your house, that's way warmer than my room temperature right now. I've also made sure I had the right measurement of milk, which is half a cup, and I have warmed that up in the microwave. You want it to be warm, but not hot. And then I've also melted my half a cup of butter, that's 1 stick. You don't want to do this too far in advance because you want it to be melted. You want it to be liquid, but you don't want it to be hot. You don't want to add anything blazing hot to this batter because it will kill the yeast. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to put our warmed up milk right into this mixing bowl. Sometimes I make the milk slightly warmer because it's going to hit this cold bowl and cool off a little bit. And yeah, I'm sticking my finger in it. They're clean. But I just want to make sure it's not too hot. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to add yeast to this. And yeast likes milk because milk has natural sugars in it and it makes the yeast happy and it starts eating away at it and it starts creating the reaction that you're looking for when you use yeast. But if it's too hot, the yeast will die. If it's too cold, like me, when I'm too cold, it becomes inactive, right? So it'll just sit there and do nothing. So you want it to be warm, but not too warm. I usually try to gauge it to be about body temperature. So if I touch it and I'm like, oh, well, that's warm, that feels cozy, that kind of feels right. I don't feel like any coolness on there. I don't feel too much heat. If it's a little above body temperature, it's still okay. But if you touch it and you think, ooh, I wonder if this is still too hot, it probably is. Give it a minute, go get yourself a glass of water, kill some time talking on the video like I'm doing because it is still a little bit too warm. You just want to gauge this because the yeast is going to make or break this whole recipe. So you want to get this part right. And now we're good. So I'm going to take my 1 packet of yeast and sprinkle it right in there. Make sure you get all of it. Some people like to do this part outside of the mixing bowl. They'll do it in here and then just transfer it to the bowl. I think that's okay if you want to do it that way, but I feel like, you know, when you work with yeast and you pour it from one container into the other, there is always something left that doesn't make the transfer. So I feel like why not just put it into the bowl where you're mixing up the dough anyway, and then that way you're sure to have all the yeast in there. So what I'm doing now, I just want to make sure it's all wet, okay? I want to make sure that all those little bits of yeast are exposed to the milk. So if there's any clumps, I'm trying to break those up. And just give it a few minutes to start creating that reaction that we're looking for. And I also scrape off that spoon so all the yeast stays in there. Okay, and then once you've done this part, you're going to want to give it about 5 minutes just to chill out and get happy before you start adding everything else. This part is boring. Now my yeast had a chance to get happy. I don't see a lot of activity in there, but I am seeing some bubbles. It does have that like yeasty smell, which if you don't like that smell, you might be in the wrong place, because I think that's one of the best smells in the world. Okay, so I've got that started. I've put my dough hook attachment in here, and I'm ready to start building the dough and adding the rest of the ingredients. So we're gonna start out with adding in our sugar. I always like to add the sugar first. Not all recipes will tell you to do that, but yeast likes sugar, so I just want to make this as happy as I can right off the bat. And I just give it a little swirl. Then I'm going to add my eggs and vanilla. And I just kind of turn that up really quick for a brief second, just to break up those egg yolks. You could always do that in advance in the bowl too, either way. Just beat it up until it's pretty consistent. Okay, next we are going to add our butter. And this dough hook attachment has this large plate on top, so I definitely like to stop the mixer when I'm adding stuff. And you'll see this butter is still melted and liquidy. It was no problem to pour in, but it's definitely cool now. It's like room temperature. So I think I caught it just at the right time before it started going solid again. And now to add the flour, I always lower the bowl because the flour is the tricky bit. And you could always make a tremendous mess adding too much. And you don't want to add all of it at once. That's a recipe for a big kitchen mess. So I add maybe a cup and a half or so in there. And just give it a little stir until you see it's getting moistened. And then we're going to add some more. So I'm doing this roughly in thirds. Like 1 cup at a time. And if you see you've got some flour that is not getting worked in, you can always take a spatula, like a rubber spatula, and just knock it down the sides so it all gets in there. And what I'm going to do is take my salt, which is the only thing we haven't added yet, mix it in with the rest of my flour. Now I'm not going to add all of this yet because some of that other one wasn't quite incorporated because I scraped it down off the sides. So I'm going to do this one in like 2 parts also. Okay, and the last bit, here we go. Just swoop it all in there. And if you didn't get any on the counter at all, you are better than I am. Because there's always just a little bit that manages to escape. But not bad. It's pretty good today. So we're just going to mix this until all the ingredients are incorporated and it starts forming into an actual dough. You'll be able to hear it. It'll start making this like knocking around noise. That's when you're doing it right. And it'll start pulling everything away from the sides and the bottom too, which is exactly what you want. This recipe has a lot of butter in it, so you shouldn't have any issues with it sticking to the sides of the bowl or the bottom. If you let it run for a couple minutes and you are getting that, you can always put just like a slight drizzle of a flavorless oil, like a vegetable oil or canola or avocado, just down the edge of the bowl. Maybe a teaspoon at a time, just to see if that will help. But with this recipe, I really don't think you're going to need it. Let's see where we're at. Okay, so you can see, hopefully, this is starting to come up and stick to the dough hook. It is pulling off from the sides and the bottom really nicely. It's slightly sticky and a little lumpy. So what you're looking for is for the dough to be nice and smooth. And I think we've got maybe a little more kneading to go before it will be. If you're doing this by hand in a bowl, you're just going to add all the ingredients in the same order that I showed you, and you're going to mix and mix and mix until it's combined. And once it's actually combined into something you can pick up that's not just falling apart and kind of still chunky, once it's one cohesive dough, it'll still feel kind of loose and wet. You can just dust a little bit of flour right on your work surface, whether it's a clean countertop or a large wooden cutting board, whatever you happen to be working on. Dust it with a little bit of flour and then knead it by hand. I'm going to let this go for another minute or so on here to get smooth, but I'll show you how to knead it in case you are doing it by hand. Okay, so I've left this on here another minute or so. It's not exactly where I want it to be, but I wanted to show you, if you are doing this by hand, how you would knead it. So I'm just pulling all the dough off the hook here. And I'm taking a little bit of flour and just dusting the surface right here, because I don't want it to stick. But you'll see, it should come out pretty easily and it shouldn't be sticky. There we go. So it looks nice. You can see it's not even sticking to my hands because it is so buttery. I don't even know if I needed this flour here, but since it's still a little wet, I'm gonna give it a whirl. So what you're gonna do is put a ball, fold it towards yourself, and push down and away. Do a quarter turn so that the side that was facing the fold, where you folded towards yourself, is now facing the side. And do the same thing. Fold it towards yourself and push away. And keep rotating this way. And And depending on if you did it in the mixer and you just want to finish it this way, or if you have done it by hand and other conditions in your kitchen, how warm it is, how big your eggs were. I mean, everybody's got their own variables. So some things, it's really hard to tell you precisely how long you're going to have to do this. So you can see I'm moving it around a little bit. It's because I'm feeling it's still a little bit wet, and I'm actually working in a little bit of this extra flour, which if you're doing it by hand, you might need to. If you're gonna do the whole thing in the mixer, that's cool too. I mean, it's way easier, but you do have to look at it occasionally and see what's happening, right? You don't want to overdo it. I would say you probably in a stand mixer, you don't want to let it go for really any more than like 4 or 5 minutes, just because you don't want it to be overworked. I mean, the mixer works a lot harder at this than I do. And if it's overworked, what's going to happen is you're going to develop a lot more gluten in this bread. And that's what might make it a little chewy, or a little like more tough feeling, and you don't want that. You want this to be soft and delicious. So here we have our bread, or our dough. I wish it was bread already, that would be so easy. But this is ready now to go for its first rise. So I take a big bowl, and I either drizzle a little oil in here, but I have this wrapper from the butter that I had, and I also have this bowl that the butter was melting in, so I figure it's an oil, I might as well use it. So I'm just rolling this dough in here. This kind of keeps it from sticking to the bowl. It keeps it from drying out. If you don't have the extra butter parts, you can always just put some canola, vegetable oil, avocado oil here in this bowl and kind of flip the dough around in it and let it go. So what I'm gonna do now is wash my hands because they're very greasy. Then I'm going to cover this up with some plastic wrap and a damp kitchen towel. And then I'm going to put it in the oven, which has been closed this whole time. And remember, I preheated it just a little bit. I didn't leave it on. I just turned it on for a minute and shut it back off, just so the temperature in there would be nice and cozy and warm. If you open that up and it still feels hot in there to you, don't put it in there. Maybe go get a thermometer, see what the temperature is like. Maybe put it in there and leave the door open for a while. You don't want this to get too hot. You don't want it to start baking. You just want it to be a warm environment so that yeast will grow. So I'm gonna leave it in there for an hour, and then we'll come back and we'll make the filling and assemble the dough and get it ready and make it look all pretty. All right, see you soon.